I stared at my reflection in the elevator doors of Memorial Health Hospital, adjusting my blazer one last time. 10 years ago, I'd walked out of these same doors in tears after dropping out of medical school. Now I was returning as someone entirely different, though my family didn't know that yet. "Dr. Sarah Carter?" A voice called as I stepped into the lobby. "The board is waiting for you in conference room A." I nodded, suppressing a smile. If only my father could see me now. Dr. James Carter, the renowned surgeon, who'd spent years telling everyone how his daughter had failed him by quitting medical school in her 3rd year. "She couldn't handle the pressure," he'd say at every family gathering, shaking his head in disappointment. "Now look at her working some corporate job instead of saving lives like a real doctor." What he didn't know was that while he was busy criticizing my choices, I'd been building something bigger than he could imagine. Today's meeting would finalize my private equity firm's acquisition of Memorial Health, the very hospital where he'd built his reputation. The conference room doors opened to reveal the hospital's entire board of directors. "Dr. Carter," Chairman Wilson stood to greet me. "Everything is ready for signing." As I took my seat, my phone buzzed. A text from Mom. "Don't forget Thanksgiving dinner tonight. Your father expects everyone there by 6. I smiled, thinking about the timing. In exactly 8 hours, I would be sitting at my parents' dining table, listening to the usual litany of disappointments. But this time would be different. "Before we proceed," I addressed the board, "I want to confirm one detail. All staff contracts will be honored under the new ownership?" "Yes," Wilson nodded. "Though we're curious about your insistence on keeping the current surgical team intact. Let's just say I have a personal interest in maintaining Memorial's excellence in surgery," I replied, thinking of my father's department. As I signed the final papers, making me the owner of Memorial Health, I couldn't help but remember the day I'd left medical school. I discovered that while I loved medicine, my true talent lay in fixing broken systems rather than broken bodies. Instead of becoming another surgeon, I'd chosen to build a company that acquired and transformed struggling hospitals. "Congratulations, Dr. Carter," Wilson said, shaking my hand. "Memorial Health is now yours." I checked my watch, 2 p.m. Just 4 hours until Thanksgiving dinner, where my family would once again gather to remind me of my greatest failure. "One more thing," I said to Wilson. "I'd like the board to join me for dinner tonight. There's someone I think you should meet." As I drove to my parents' house later that evening, I thought about how everything was about to change. The familiar ache of being the family disappointment had fueled me for years, driving me to build something they couldn't ignore. I pulled into the driveway, noticing my brother's Tesla parked front and center. The pride of place as always. Michael, the successful cardiologist who'd followed in our father's footsteps. The perfect son. Inside, the house smelled of turkey and judgment. Mom hugged me briefly, already distracted by her hosting duties. Dad barely looked up from his wine glass. "Sarah," Michael called out, smirking. "Still working in business? You know, Dad just saved another life today." "What did you do? Look at spreadsheets." I took a deep breath, checking my phone. The board would be arriving soon. "Actually," I started, but Dad cut me off. "At least she has a job," he sighed. "Though it's a shame she couldn't handle medical school. All that potential wasted on pushing papers." The doorbell rang. "Are we expecting someone else?" Mom asked, frowning. I stood up, smoothing my blazer. "Yes, actually. Some colleagues of mine." I walked to the door, my heart pounding with anticipation. "And Dad? They have something interesting to tell you about Memorial Health." The door opened to reveal Chairman Wilson and the entire hospital board, all smiling at me with newfound respect. "Dr. Carter," Wilson said loudly, "your acquisition of Memorial Health is complete. Shall we discuss your plans for the surgical department with your father?" The sound of my mother's wine glass shattering on the floor was just the beginning. The silence in the dining room was deafening. My father's face had drained of all color, his usual confident posture crumbling as Chairman Wilson's words sank in. My brother Michael's smirk had frozen into something between disbelief and horror. I don't understand," my father finally managed, looking between me and the board members. "Acquisition, Sarah." Chairman Wilson stepped forward, seemingly oblivious to the family drama unfolding. "Dr. Carter, your daughter's private equity firm has been transforming struggling hospitals across the country. Memorial Health is her 10th acquisition this year. My mother, still frozen by her shattered wine glass, whispered, 10 hospitals? 11 actually, I corrected quietly. We closed on St. Luke's last month. Michael stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This is ridiculous. Sarah couldn't even finish medical school. How could she possibly own the hospital where you and Dad work? I finished for him, finally allowing myself a small smile. Would you like to see the paperwork? Dad's hands were trembling slightly as he set down his wine glass. Why wasn't I informed about this sale? I'm the head of surgery. The board was under strict confidentiality, Chairman Wilson explained. Dr. Carter, Sarah, insisted on keeping the acquisition quiet until everything was finalized. I moved to help Mom clean up the broken glass, but she waved me away, still staring at me like she was seeing a stranger. In a way she was. They'd all been so busy mourning the doctor I didn't become, they'd never bothered to see who I actually was. Your daughter's company has an impressive track record, one of the board members added. The hospitals she's acquired have shown remarkable improvements in both patient care and financial stability. My father's face darkened. So this is your revenge? Buying the hospital to what? Fire me. I felt a flash of hurt, quickly replaced by determination. Even now he assumed the worst of me. Actually, Dad, if you'd let me finish earlier, I was going to tell you that we're expanding the surgical department. Double the operating rooms, new equipment, increased staff. We've seen her proposals, Chairman Wilson nodded. The changes will make Memorial Health one of the top surgical centers in the country. Michael sank back into his chair, looking stunned. But you're not even a real doctor. No, I agreed, meeting his eyes steadily. I'm not. I'm someone who looks at broken systems and fixes them. Someone who sees potential where others see failure. I turned to my father, who hadn't moved from his spot at the head of the table. You always said I couldn't handle the pressure of medicine. But while you were telling everyone about my failure, I was building something bigger than any single surgeon could achieve. The turkey was getting cold, the carefully set table forgotten as my family struggled to process the shift in power. Mom had finally cleaned up the broken glass but remained standing, as if sitting might make this reality too real. How? She asked softly. How did you do all this without us knowing? I thought about all the family dinners I'd sat through, biting my tongue as they dismissed my corporate job. The holidays where I'd listened to stories about Michael's surgical victories while they ignored my growing success. It was easier than you'd think, I replied. None of you ever asked about my work. You were too busy focusing on what I wasn't to see what I had become. Chairman Wilson cleared his throat. Perhaps we should discuss the new surgical wing over dinner? Dr. Carter. James, your experience will be invaluable as we implement these changes. My father looked up at me, and for the first time in 10 years I saw something new in his eyes. Uncertainty. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably and he knew it. Sarah, he started, then stopped, seemingly at a loss for words. But this wasn't about revenge or power. It was about finally being seen for who I was, not who they'd wanted me to be. The board members are staying for dinner, I said, taking my seat at the table. We have a lot to discuss about Memorial Health's future. Your future, Dad. As everyone awkwardly found their places around the dining table, I caught my reflection in the window. I saw what they were all finally seeing. Not a failed medical student, but a woman who had built an empire her own way. The real question was, were they ready to accept this new reality? The dinner that followed was unlike any other in our family's history. The perfectly roasted turkey sat largely untouched as Chairman Wilson detailed my plans for Memorial Health. With each revelation, I watched my family's perceptions crumble and rebuild. The new pediatric wing will open next spring, I explained, meeting my father's gaze. We're bringing in cutting-edge technology that most hospitals can only dream about. The funding for that would be... Michael started, his voice trailing off. $50 million, I finished. Just for the initial phase. Mom's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. She'd switched from wine after dropping the first one. But Sarah, how? Where did you get that kind of money? I took a slow breath, remembering the long journey that had led to this moment. Remember that small healthcare consulting firm I started after leaving medical school? The one you called my little business venture? Dad shifted uncomfortably in his seat, no doubt remembering his dismissive comments. That little venture. grew into Carter Healthcare Solutions. We specialize in turning around struggling hospitals, making them both profitable and better for patient care. I paused, letting that sink in. Last year's revenue was just over $800 million. Michael choked on his water. Chairman Wilson smiled knowingly. He'd seen the numbers during the acquisition process. All those times you were too busy to attend family functions, Mom said slowly. You weren't just avoiding us, were you? No, I replied softly. I was building something. I was flying around the country meeting with hospital boards, securing investments, creating change. But none of you ever asked what I was actually doing. My father, who hadn't spoken much since the board's arrival, finally found his voice. Why didn't you tell us? The question hung in the air, heavy with years of unspoken hurt. I set down my fork and looked directly at him. Would you have listened, Dad? Really listened? Or would you have just told me again how I was wasting my potential by not becoming a surgeon? His face flushed, but he didn't argue. He couldn't, not with the hospital board sitting at his table, not with the evidence of my success so clearly displayed. Dr. Carter, Chairman Wilson addressed my father, your daughter has revolutionized healthcare management across 6 states. The medical journal is running a feature on her next month. I watched as pride and embarrassment battled across my father's face. For the first time he was seeing me through someone else's eyes, not as his failed daughter, but as a force in the medical world, albeit in a different way than he'd imagined. The surgical department, he said finally, his voice rough. You're really expanding it? Yes, I nodded. Because despite everything, Dad, you're an excellent surgeon. The department you've built deserves to grow. This isn't about revenge, it's about making something better. Tears welled in Mom's eyes. Oh, Sarah. We've been so blind. Michael, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly stood up. I need some air, he muttered, heading for the patio. I followed him outside, leaving the board members discussing plans with our parents. The night air was crisp, carrying the last hints of autumn. All these years, Michael said without turning around, I've been looking down on you. The family failure. My little sister who couldn't cut it in medical school. And now? I asked quietly. He turned and I saw something I'd never seen in my brother's eyes before. Respect. Now I work for you, he said with a short laugh. How's that for irony? No, I corrected him. You work with me. That's the difference, Michael. I didn't do this to lord power over anyone. I did it because I saw a way to help more people than I ever could have as just one doctor. Back inside, I could hear the board members preparing to leave. As we walked back in, Dad stood up from his chair. Sarah, he said, his voice different somehow. Would you show me those plans for the new surgical wing? I smiled, reaching for my briefcase. Actually, Dad, I'd like your input on them. You know better than anyone what the department needs. As we spread the blueprints across the cleared dinner table, I felt the shift in the room. The old dynamics were gone, replaced by something new, something healthier.
The words "license suspended" stared back at me from the official letter, each character feeling like a personal betrayal. After 15 years of dedicated service at Boston Memorial Hospital, my career had been reduced to a 2-page notice citing professional misconduct and questionable medical decisions. I placed the letter carefully on my desk, next to the framed photo of my husband Mark and me at my medical school graduation. The irony of that happy moment wasn't lost on me. His mother had been there too, beaming proudly at her son's new doctor wife. If only I'd known then what that approval would cost. My name is Dr. Emily Chen, and at 38, I'd built a reputation as one of Boston Memorial's most respected emergency medicine physicians. That was before Victoria Sterling, my mother-in-law and newly appointed hospital board member, decided I wasn't worthy of her son after all. Dr. Chen, Jenny, one of our veteran nurses, poked her head into my office. Her eyes were red-rimmed, she'd obviously been crying. The staff, we've all heard, this isn't right. I managed a small smile. No, it's not. But it's not over either. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Dr. Sterling was bragging about it in the boardroom, said she'd finally dealt with the problem. We all know what she's doing. Emily, this isn't about patient care. No, it wasn't. This was about control. About a woman who couldn't bear the thought of her precious son being married to someone who wouldn't bow to her influence. The fact that Mark and I had been happily married for 10 years. That I'd built my own successful career without her help, it ate at her. Jenny, I said carefully, Those patient files Victoria claims show my misconduct. Did she access them herself? Jenny's eyes widened slightly. Yes, she's been coming in late at night, going through records. We thought it was just normal board oversight. But, I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. And did she use her own login credentials? No, Jenny replied, understanding dawning on her face. She's been using Dr. Morrison's. He's been on sabbatical, but his access is still active. Exactly what I'd suspected. Victoria's arrogance had made her sloppy. She'd left a trail, thinking no one would dare question her actions. That evening, I sat in our home office, surrounded by copies of patient records I'd carefully documented over the years. Mark found me there, still reviewing files hours after dinner. He said softly, Mom called. She wants us to come over tomorrow. Says she has something important to discuss. I looked up at my husband, this kind, brilliant man who'd somehow emerged decent despite Victoria's toxic influence. I assume she wants to celebrate destroying my career? He sat heavily in the chair across from me. I don't understand why she's doing this. You're an amazing doctor. The patients love you. The staff respects you. But I don't defer to her. I finished. I don't ask her permission for career decisions or consult her about our personal lives. That's what this is really about. Mark ran a hand through his hair in frustration. I'll talk to her. Make her understand. No. I cut him off gently. Don't you see? That's exactly what she wants, to force you to choose between us. To prove she still controls you. He was quiet for a moment, studying the papers spread across my desk. These patient records. What are you looking for? I hesitated. What I'd discovered in my review of the files was bigger than just Victoria's vendetta against me. Much bigger. Your mother didn't just access patient records illegally, I said carefully. She modified them, changed treatment dates, altered medication records. But she made a mistake. She didn't know about the backup systems I put in place years ago. Mark's face paled. She tampered with medical records? To make it look like I'd made dangerous decisions. Yes, but in doing so, she revealed something else, something that's been happening at Boston Memorial for years. I pulled out a specific set of files, cases that had always bothered me, but that I'd never been able to connect until now. Victoria's tampering had inadvertently exposed a pattern that had been hidden in plain sight. These patients, I explained, spreading out the files, all came through the ER with similar symptoms. All were transferred to the private wing under the care of specific doctors. And all had their original diagnoses and treatment plans mysteriously altered. Mark leaned forward, his medical training kicking in as he scanned the records. These changes, they're all pushing expensive treatments, unnecessary procedures. Exactly. Your mother was so focused on discrediting me that she didn't realize she was exposing a massive insurance fraud scheme, one that's been operating at Boston Memorial for at least a decade. The implications hung heavy in the air. This wasn't just about my career anymore, this was about systematic fraud that had potentially affected hundreds of patients. How long have you known? Mark asked quietly. I've suspected something was wrong for years. Certain cases didn't add up, treatments seemed excessive, but I could never prove anything. The records always seemed to support the decisions, even when my notes said otherwise. I pulled out another file, this one containing records of my own documentation over the years. I started keeping separate records after the first few suspicious cases, private notes, copies of original diagnoses, even recordings of some patient consultations. I knew something wasn't right, but I never imagined that my mother would accidentally expose it all. Mark finished. He was silent for a moment. Then, what are you going to do? I smiled for the first time that day. First, we're going to your mother's house tomorrow. I want to hear exactly what she has to say about my suspension. And then I'm going to meet with someone who's very interested in insurance fraud at major hospitals. Someone Victoria would never suspect. I know. The next morning, I made 2 calls. The first was to Dr. Sarah Martinez at the State Medical Board, not about my suspension, but about a pattern of suspicious billing practices I'd documented. The second call was to FBI Special Agent David Chin, no relation, who specialized in healthcare fraud investigations. He'd been looking into several hospitals in the Boston area, but hadn't been able to crack the careful documentation that covered up the scheme. This is exactly what we needed, he said after I explained what I'd found. But are you sure you want to do this? Your mother-in-law tried to destroy my career to maintain her control over her son, I finished. She needs to learn that actions have consequences. That afternoon, Mark and I drove to Victoria's massive colonial home in the suburbs. She opened the door wearing her usual perfect smile, every gray hair expertly colored and styled. Mark, darling, she cooed, embracing him before turning her cold eyes to me. Emily. I suppose you've heard the news about my suspension? I kept my voice steady. Yes, I have. Well, come in, she said, ushering us into her formal living room. We need to discuss your future. Or rather, lack thereof. I sat quietly as she launched into her carefully prepared speech about how this was really for the best, how I could find something more suitable to do with my time, how Mark deserved a wife who would prioritize family over career. After all, she concluded with a smirk, you'll never practice medicine again. I've made sure of that. Perhaps now Mark will finally see reason and end this unfortunate marriage. I felt Mark tense beside me, but I squeezed his hand gently. Stay calm. Let her talk. Actually, Victoria, I said pleasantly, I should thank you. She blinked, clearly thrown by my response. Thank me? Yes. Your thorough review of my patient files has been incredibly helpful. In fact, I have a meeting tomorrow morning with some people who are very interested in what you found. What are you talking about? Her perfect composure cracked slightly. The FBI's Healthcare Fraud Division, for one. The State Medical Board, for another. They're particularly interested in the pattern of altered records and inflated billing you accidentally exposed while trying to discredit me. The color drained from Victoria's face. You're lying. You can't prove anything, can't I? I pulled out my phone, showing her the access logs Jenny had provided. Every time you used Dr. Morrison's credentials to access and modify records, it was logged. Every change you made was tracked. And in trying to make me look bad, you revealed something much bigger, didn't you? Victoria's hands trembled as she reached for her wine glass. You have no idea what you're talking about. The board will never believe you over me. The board won't have a choice, I replied calmly. Not with the evidence I've collected, not just about your tampering, but about the entire scheme. Did you really think I wouldn't keep my own records? That I wouldn't document every suspicious case that came through my ER? Mark sat forward, his voice tight with anger. How long, Mom? How long have you known about the fraud? Victoria's mask finally cracked completely. You don't understand. The hospital needed the revenue. Insurance companies keep cutting reimbursements, costs keep rising. We did what we had to do, by ordering unnecessary procedures? By altering patient records to justify excessive treatments? I shook my head. How many people were harmed by this, Victoria? How many patients underwent procedures they didn't need? No one was harmed, she snapped. They got excellent care, care they didn't need, Mark interrupted. Care that could have caused complications, that put them at risk unnecessarily. Also the hospital could bill their insurance for more money. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. The FBI will be executing search warrants tomorrow morning. They'll seize the hospital's records, both sets of them. The real ones and the altered ones. Victoria's face went from pale to ashen. You can't do this. You'll destroy everything. No, I corrected her. You did that when you decided to abuse your power. When you thought you could use your position to control everyone around you. As we walked to the door, she called out desperately, Mark, please. You can't let her do this. I'm your mother. Mark turned back to her, his expression sad but determined. And Emily is my wife. The woman I love. The doctor who actually cares about her patients. You did this to yourself, Mom. The next morning, I watched from across the street as FBI agents entered Boston Memorial. Victoria arrived shortly after, only to be met by agents at the door. Her perfect composure crumbled as they escorted her inside. Jenny called me an hour later. They're going through everything, she reported. Dr. Morrison just confessed to giving Dr. Sterling his login credentials. Said she threatened his position if he didn't cooperate. How many others? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. At least 6 doctors involved in the scheme directly. More who knew but stayed quiet. The private wing is shut down completely while they investigate. Over the next few weeks, the full scope of the fraud became clear. For over a decade, certain doctors had been ordering unnecessary tests and procedures, altering records to justify the treatments, and billing insurance companies for millions in fraudulent claims. Victoria, as board member and chief of surgery, had been one of the architects of the scheme. Her attempt to discredit me had inadvertently exposed the careful documentation system they'd created to cover their tracks. The state medical board not only reinstated my license but commended my documentation of suspicious cases. The FBI used my records as a roadmap to unravel the entire conspiracy. 3 months after that evening at Victoria's house, I sat in a federal courthouse, preparing to testify about what I'd discovered. Mark squeezed my hand as Victoria was led in wearing handcuffs, a far cry from her usual elegant appearance. She looked older, defeated. When her eyes met mine, I saw something I'd never seen before: respect, tinged with fear. The trial lasted 2 weeks. In the end, Victoria and 5 other doctors were convicted of healthcare fraud and conspiracy. The hospital's reputation was severely damaged, but new leadership was brought in to rebuild properly. I was offered the position of Chief of Emergency Medicine at Boston Memorial's reorganized administration. I accepted on one condition: that we implement rigorous oversight and documentation systems to prevent future fraud. Mark supported me completely, though the situation with his mother strained him. We visited her once in prison, where she finally offered something close to an apology. "I thought I was protecting the hospital," she said. "But really, I was just drunk on power. The ability to control things, to make decisions without anyone questioning me. That's why you hated me so much," I realized. "Because I questioned things. Because I kept records and documented inconsistencies." She nodded slowly. "You were a threat to the system we'd built. And to my control over Mark. I couldn't allow either." A year after Victoria's conviction, I stood in Boston Memorial's ER, watching my team work. The hospital was different now, more transparent, more focused on patient care than profits. My detailed documentation system had become the standard across all departments. Mark joined me during his break from surgery, wrapping an arm around my waist. "Mom's parole hearing is next month," he said quietly. I nodded. "We'd discussed this. What do you think she'll do if they release her?" "Move to Florida with my aunt," he replied. "She knows she can't stay in Boston. Her reputation here is destroyed, along with her power." I added, "That's what will hurt her the most." He smiled slightly. "You know what's ironic? If she hadn't tried to destroy your career, hadn't gotten sloppy trying to discredit you, the fraud might never have been discovered." "Sometimes people's worst impulses lead to their downfall," I said. "She was so focused on controlling us that she lost control of everything." Later that evening, as I reviewed patient files, properly documented and transparently stored, I found myself thinking about power and control. Victoria had spent years building her empire of influence, never realizing that true power comes from using your position to help others, not control them. The photo from my medical school graduation still sat on my desk, but now it was joined by another, a news clipping about the fraud conviction and the doctor whose careful documentation had exposed it all. Victoria had tried to end my medical career to maintain her control. Instead, she'd helped me remake the hospital into something better, something honest. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemies, it's about building something stronger from the ruins of their schemes.
The mahogany doors of Preston and Associates law firm loomed before me as my father's voice boomed through the hallway. "She doesn't belong here." Margaret was barely functioning in her final years. "This will reading is for real family members only." I smoothed down my simple navy dress, a hand-tailored Loro Piana piece that cost more than my cousin Rebecca's entire wardrobe, and maintained my composure. For 3 years, I'd been the only one who visited Grandma Margaret regularly, managing her investments while the family assumed I was just keeping an old woman company. "Julia shouldn't even be here," Rebecca chimed in, adjusting her flashy designer belt with its obviously fake logo. "All she did was play nurse while we were building successful careers." If they only knew that those quiet afternoons with Grandma had been spent restructuring her entire investment portfolio, turning her modest wealth into an empire worth hundreds of millions. While they were too busy to visit, I had helped Grandma create something extraordinary. "Mr. Preston will see you now," the receptionist announced, eyeing my family's growing hostility with concern. "Julia, wait outside," my father commanded. "This doesn't concern you." I caught a glimpse of Mr. Preston through the doorway, the only other person who knew what Grandma and I had accomplished together. He gave me a subtle nod, right on schedule. "Actually," I started, but my older brother Michael cut me off. "Just go get coffee or something useful." he sneered. "We'll let you know if there's any charitable donation in your name." I thought about the documents waiting to be revealed, about how Grandma had laughed when we finalized her plans 3 months ago. "Sometimes," she'd said, "the best lessons come with a change of address." My phone buzzed, a message from Grandma's investment team. All properties transferred successfully. Tenant notices ready for distribution. The family filed into the conference room, pointedly closing the door in my face. Through the glass, I could see them taking their seats, already discussing how they'd divide Grandma's supposed fortune. "She wasn't even coherent near the end," my Aunt Susan declared loudly. "Spending all that time with Julia probably addled her mind even more." If they only knew that during those addled moments, Grandma had been orchestrating the most brilliant financial maneuver of her life. While they assumed she was declining, she was actually building a real estate empire that would change all their lives. Another buzz from my phone. The property management company confirming that all security codes and locks would be changed by sunset. My cousin David's voice carried through the door. "Remember how Julia used to brag about being Grandma's favorite? Guess we'll see how far that got her." I smiled, thinking of the afternoons Grandma and I had spent reviewing property acquisitions. "They think money is about buying things," she told me. "Real wealth is about owning the things other people need." Mr. Preston's assistant opened the door. "Miss Walker, we're ready for you now." I entered the conference room, taking in the scene. My family arranged around the massive table, their expressions ranging from annoyance to outright hostility. "This is a private reading," my father started, but Mr. Preston held up his hand. "Actually, Miss Walker's presence is essential to these proceedings." He opened a thick folder. "Shall we begin?" I sat quietly in the corner, watching as my family leaned forward eagerly. They had no idea that everything they thought they knew about Grandma's wealth was about to change. "Before we proceed," Mr. Preston continued, "I should note that Mrs. Margaret Walker was of completely sound mind when she made these arrangements. We have extensive medical documentation and video recordings of all our meetings." My father waved his hand dismissively. Yes, get to the distributions." Mr. Preston adjusted his glasses. "Very well. We'll start with the residential properties where you're all currently living." The stage was set. In just moments, they would learn that the granddaughter they'd dismissed as a simple caretaker was about to become their landlord. After all, Grandma always said timing was everything in both business and revenge. "Let's begin with the residential properties," Mr. Preston announced, his tone carefully neutral. "As you know, Mrs. Walker owned the homes where each of you currently reside." Yes, my father interrupted impatiently. "The houses will obviously be transferred to their current occupants. We've already discussed renovations." Mr. Preston cleared his throat. "Actually, Mrs. Walker made quite different arrangements. All residential properties have been transferred to Walker Heritage Limited, a corporation established 3 months ago." Rebecca frowned. "What corporation? Just tell us who gets what." "I'm getting to that," Mr. Preston continued. "Walker Heritage Limited is now your landlord. Here are your new lease agreements, effective immediately." The room exploded into chaos as he distributed thick envelopes. "Lease agreements?" my brother Michael shouted. "This must be a mistake. That's my house." "Actually," Mr. Preston corrected, "it was your mother's house and now it belongs to Walker Heritage Limited. Your rent will be due on the 1st of each month at market rates." My Aunt Susan ripped open her envelope and gasped. $3,000 a month? This is robbery. "That's the current market rate for your neighborhood." I spoke up for the first time. "We had multiple independent appraisals done." The room fell silent as every head turned toward me. "We?" my father asked slowly. "What do you mean we?" Mr. Preston smiled slightly. "Allow me to introduce the owner and CEO of Walker Heritage Limited, Miss Julia Walker." The silence that followed was deafening. Rebecca's fake designer belt clicked against the table as she slumped in her chair. "This is impossible," my father sputtered. "She's nobody. She's nothing." "Actually," Mr. Preston continued, "Mrs. Walker and Miss Julia spent the last 3 years restructuring the entire family portfolio. The properties you're living in are just the beginning." He pressed a button and the room's screens lit up with a comprehensive overview of Walker Heritage Limited's holdings. Apartment complexes, office buildings, shopping centers, an empire worth over $300 million. While you were all too busy to visit, I said quietly, Grandma and I were building something extraordinary. She taught me everything she knew about real estate and investment. Those afternoons you thought I was just playing nurse were actually board meetings. You can't do this to us, Michael protested. We're family. Family. I laughed softly. Like when you told everyone I was taking advantage of a senile old woman. Or when you tried to have me removed as her caregiver. My phone buzzed. A message from the property management company. New locks installed at all properties. Security codes changed as requested. You have two options, I continued, opening my laptop. Sign the lease agreements at market rate or vacate within 30 days. Grandma was very clear about the terms. This is ridiculous, my Aunt Susan declared. We'll contest the will. You can try, Mr. Preston interjected. But Mrs. Walker made dozens of videos explaining her decisions. She also underwent 3 separate mental competency evaluations. This was all very carefully planned. I pulled out another set of documents. She also documented every missed holiday, every ignored phone call, every time you were too busy to visit. 3 years of detailed records showing exactly why she made these choices. The fight slowly drained from their faces as reality set in. They weren't just losing their inheritances, they were becoming tenants in their own homes. The lease agreements need to be signed by the end of business today, I informed them. Otherwise, eviction proceedings will begin tomorrow morning. After all, as Grandma always said, real estate waits for no one. Especially those who never bothered to understand its value. The aftermath of Grandma's will reading sent shockwaves through the family. Within hours, local real estate agents were flooded with panicked calls from my relatives desperately seeking alternative housing, only to discover that rental prices everywhere were even higher than what I was offering. One by one they signed the leases, their hands shaking with rage and humiliation. Initial here, acknowledging the no sublease clause, I instructed my father, watching him grip the pen so tightly it nearly snapped. And here, accepting the terms of property maintenance. You're enjoying this, aren't you? He growled. I thought about all the family dinners where they'd mocked my choice to spend time with Grandma. All the snide comments about how I was wasting my potential by not pursuing a real career like them. Actually, I replied, I'm just following Grandma's final business lesson. Real estate is about location, 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 and the location of power matters most of all. My phone buzzed continuously with messages from family members. Rebecca, we need to talk about my rent reduction. Michael, this can't be legal. My lawyers will contact you. Aunt Susan, please, let's discuss a family discount. I archived them all, focusing instead on the property management reports. The empire Grandma and I had built was already generating substantial returns, and I had plans for expansion. 1 month later, I sat in my new office. The converted sunroom where Grandma and I had plotted this entire transformation. The room still held her favorite chair, but now it overlooked a scale model of our real estate holdings. Your father is here to see you, my assistant announced. He doesn't have an appointment. I watched on the security feed as he paced the lobby, his once immaculate suit showing signs of wear. The country club membership he could no longer afford had taken its toll on his carefully maintained image. Send him up, I decided. It's time for his first monthly property inspection anyway. He entered like a deflated version of his former self. Julia, this has gone on long enough. We need to discuss a reasonable solution. Reasonable? I raised an eyebrow. Like when you reasonably suggested I was taking advantage of Grandma, or when you reasonably tried to ban me from her funeral. We were wrong, he admitted. But this punishment. This isn't punishment, I corrected him. This is business. Grandma taught me well. Every investment should generate appropriate returns. I turned my laptop screen to show him the family property's current market values. Your home's worth has increased 15% since the transfer. The rental income is exactly what any business owner would expect. But we're family, he protested weakly. Family. I smiled, pulling out Grandma's old diary. Let me read you something Grandma wrote. They think blood is thicker than water, but they forget that concrete foundations matter more than both. Over the next few months, the family dynamics shifted dramatically. Rebecca downsized to a smaller apartment in one of my buildings. Michael's wife left him, tired of his reduced circumstances. Aunt Susan had to get a job for the first time in 20 years to afford her rent. My property empire continued to grow. Walker Heritage Limited acquired more buildings, expanded into commercial real estate, and developed new luxury complexes. The family homes were just a small part of a much larger portfolio. 1 year after the will reading, I received an invitation to a family reunion, hosted at a modest community center rather than their usual country club. "Your cousins are organizing a family meeting," my assistant reported. "They want to discuss reconciliation." I looked at the security feeds showing my relatives in their now-rented homes, all maintaining properties they once thought they'd own. "Tell them their landlord is unfortunately too busy with real estate matters to attend," I replied. "But they're welcome to submit any property maintenance requests through the official channels." Grandma's photo smiled down from my office wall. "Remember," she told me during our last meeting, "the best investment isn't in properties, it's in lessons learned." I picked up a stack of lease renewals waiting for signatures. The family that had once banned me from a will reading would now need my signature to keep their homes. After all, as Grandma always said, real estate isn't just about owning property. It's about understanding the true value of what you possess. And sometimes, the most valuable possession is the power to make others realize exactly what they've lost. The empire she helped me build stands as a testament to her wisdom and foresight. While they thought I was just a caregiver, I was becoming a CEO. While they dismissed our afternoon meetings, we were creating a legacy. Now they all live in my buildings, pay rent to my company, and understand that sometimes the person they underestimate the most becomes the person they depend on for shelter. As for me, I have properties to manage and an empire to expand. After all, real estate empires don't build themselves, but they do help rebuild broken family dynamics, one lease agreement at a time.
The champagne flowed freely at the grand opening of Signature, Boston's newest upscale restaurant. My husband David beamed at the gathered crowd, his arm casually draped around his business partner Jessica's waist. They looked perfect together, both in crisp chef whites, both glowing with success. "None of this would have been possible without my wonderful wife Stuffy," David announced, raising his glass in my direction. "Her grandmother's inheritance made our dream a reality." Our dream. I tried not to laugh at the irony as I sipped my champagne from my corner table. The dream had certainly come true, just not for me. My name is Sophie Marshall, and at 35, I was watching my husband celebrate opening a restaurant with my inheritance money and his mistress. What they didn't know was that in exactly 72 hours, everything would change. "The food is amazing," one of the guests gushed to David. "You and Jessica make such a great team." I caught Jessica's smug smile. At 28, she was everything I apparently wasn't: young, exciting, passionate about the culinary arts. She and David had met at the cooking school where he taught weekend classes. Their affair had started 6 months ago, though they thought I didn't know. My phone buzzed quietly, a text from Marcus, my grandmother's lawyer. "Everything's set for Monday. Are you sure you want to wait?" I typed back quickly, "Yes. Let them have their moment. It will make Monday more interesting." 3 months ago, I discovered the affair in the most cliché way possible. Lipstick on his collar, late nights at work, mysterious text messages. But what really caught my attention were the bank transfers. Large sums moving from our joint account, money from my grandmother's inheritance, into a new business account. When I confronted David, he'd spun a beautiful story about wanting to surprise me with his dream restaurant. He'd been so convincing, so passionate about finally pursuing his culinary ambitions. I almost believed him. Then I found the business partnership agreement. Equal ownership between David and Jessica, with me nowhere in sight. They were using my inheritance to build their future together. What they didn't know was that I'd already spoken to Marcus about my grandmother's will. The inheritance came with strict conditions. Conditions I'd kept to myself when the money first arrived. "Sophie," David called out, interrupting my thoughts. "Come join us for photos." I plastered on a smile and walked over, letting him pull me close. His cologne mixed with Jessica's perfume made my stomach turn. "We did it, honey," he whispered, his breath heavy with champagne. Everything we talked about, the restaurant, the future, all of it. I thought about the future he'd actually planned. The divorce papers I found hidden in his desk, ready to be filed once the restaurant was established, once he'd secured his new life with my money and his young girlfriend. "I'm so proud of you," I said, meaning none of it. Jessica chimed in, her voice syrupy sweet. "Sophie, you have to try the creme brulee. I perfected the recipe myself." Of course she had. Just like she helped perfect every aspect of my husband and this restaurant. I watched them exchange a quick glance, probably thinking they were being so. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Marcus. "Final paperwork filed with the court. Everything's ready." I excused myself to the bathroom, needing a moment alone. In the elegant powder room, I stared at my reflection and thought about the day 3 months ago when I'd learned the truth about my grandmother's inheritance. "The money comes with conditions," Marcus had explained, showing me the detailed clause in the will. "It must be used for the specific purpose your grandmother intended, to start your own business, not fund someone else's." I'd inherited not just money, but my grandmother's business acumen. She'd built a successful chain of boutique hotels from nothing, and she wanted me to follow in her footsteps. The inheritance was meant to be my startup capital. What happens if the money is misused? I'd asked Marcus. His smile had been grim. Then everything reverts to the contingency plan. The money, any assets purchased with it, all of it transfers to a trust under your sole control. Your grandmother was very specific about protecting her legacy. I kept this information to myself, watching as David and Jessica planned their perfect restaurant. Every decision they made, every contract they signed, every piece of equipment they bought with my inheritance, it was all building evidence for Monday. Back at the party, David was giving tours of the kitchen. State-of-the-art everything, he boasted to the guests. Only the best. Only the best of my grandmother's money, I thought, watching him show off the expensive equipment that would belong solely to me in 3 days. "The wine cellar was Sophie's idea," he continued, leading people downstairs. "She has excellent taste." Another lie. I had nothing to do with the wine cellar. That had been Jessica's pet project, filled with expensive bottles purchased with my money. I mingled with the guests, playing my part perfectly. The supportive wife, so proud of her husband's achievement. If they noticed my hands shaking slightly, they probably attributed it to emotion. "You must be so excited," one of David's culinary school friends said. "He's talked about opening his own restaurant for years. It's definitely a dream come true." I replied, watching Jessica adjust David's collar with familiar intimacy. Everything is exactly as it should be. Later that night, as the party wound down, David was too drunk on success and champagne to notice my quiet observation. He and Jessica kept finding excuses to touch each other, to share private smiles, to whisper about their triumph. "Stay at Sarah's tonight," he told me as the last guest left. "Jessica and I need to prep for tomorrow's official opening." Sarah was my best friend and the only person besides Marcus who knew the truth. She'd been the one to help me gather evidence of their affair, to document every misused dollar of my inheritance. "Of course," I said, gathering my things. "You two have so much to do." Jessica smiled triumphantly, already making herself at home in what she thought would be her kitchen. "Don't worry, Sophie. We've got everything under control." I thought about Monday morning when they'd learn about the inheritance clause, when they discover that everything they built with my money legally belonged to me. "I'm sure you do," I said, heading for the door. Everything's perfect. Monday morning arrived with perfect clarity. I sat in Marcus's office, watching the clock tick toward 10 a.m. David and Jessica would be at Signature, probably still basking in the success of their opening weekend. "The court documents have been served to the restaurant," Marcus said, checking his phone. "They should be receiving them any moment." I nodded, thinking about the security cameras we'd had installed. I wanted to see their faces when they realized what was happening. Right on cue, my phone started buzzing, David's name flashing on the screen. I declined the call, watching as text messages began flooding in. "What the hell is this?" "Sophie, answer your phone. You can't do this to us." "Should we head over?" Marcus asked, gathering the paperwork we'd need. "Let them panic for a bit longer," I replied, remembering all the nights I'd spent crying over their betrayal. "They made me wait. It's their turn now." When we arrived at Signature 30 minutes later, the scene was exactly as I'd expected. David was pacing in the dining room, his chef whites wrinkled, his face red with anger. Jessica sat at the bar, frantically calling someone, Probably her lawyer. What is this? David demanded as soon as I walked in, waving the court documents. Some kind of joke? No joke, I said calmly, setting my bag down. Just the terms of my grandmother's inheritance finally being enforced. You can't just take the restaurant, Jessica interjected, her usual poise cracking. We're equal partners. We have contracts. Actually, Marcus stepped forward. All contracts signed using funds from Sophie's inheritance are now void. The money was never meant for this purpose, and its misuse triggers the reversion clause. David's face paled. Reversion clause. My grandmother left me the money to start my own business, I explained, running my hand along the expensive bar they'd installed. Not to fund my husband's restaurant with his mistress. Jessica's sharp intake of breath told me they hadn't expected me to know about the affair. How long have you known? David asked quietly. Long enough to document everything, I replied. The affair of the misused funds, the plans to divorce me once the restaurant was established. I have it all. This is ridiculous, Jessica snapped, standing up. We built this place. We created the menu, hired the staff, designed everything. With my money, I reminded her. Money that came with conditions that have been violated. As of this morning, Signature belongs solely to me. David slumped into a chair, the reality of the situation finally hitting him. All our work, everything we planned. Like your plans to divorce me. I pulled out the papers I'd found in his desk. Were you going to wait until after the restaurant's first successful quarter, or were you timing it with moving in with Jessica? Jessica's head snapped up. You said she didn't know about that. He says a lot of things, I told her. But here's what's true. This restaurant, everything in it, all the equipment you chose, the wine cellar you stocked, it's all mine now, legally and irrevocably. Marcus started distributing more documents, official ownership transfers, management changes, everything needed to establish my complete control. You can't just take it, David tried one last time. We have reservations, staff depending on us. The restaurant will stay open, I assured him. Just under new management, my management. And us? Jessica asked, her voice small. You're both fired, I said simply. Though I'm sure you'll land on your feet. You make such a great team after all. David stood up suddenly, anger replacing his shock. This was your plan all along, wasn't it? Let us build everything, then swoop in and take it. No, David. This was your plan. Take my inheritance, build a life with your girlfriend, then discard me. I just decided to write a different ending. The next hour was a blur of legal terminology and barely contained emotions. Marcus supervised as they gathered their personal belongings, ensuring they didn't take anything purchased with my money. The apartment too? David asked as he read through the documents. You're taking our home. My home? I corrected him. Purchased with inheritance money, therefore part of the trust now. You can stay with Jessica. I hear her place is cozy. Jessica's face crumpled at that. Her studio apartment was a far cry from the luxury condo she'd been planning to share with David. As they prepared to leave, David tried one last appeal. Sophie, please. We can work something out. I'll break it off with Jessica. We can run the restaurant together. That would have been a good offer 3 months ago, I said. Before I found the divorce papers. Before I watched you build this place with her. Now it's too late. After they left, I walked through the restaurant, my restaurant now. Every detail they'd chosen, every expensive fixture they'd installed, was a testament to their arrogance. They'd been so confident in their plan that they'd never questioned where the money came from or what conditions it carried. My phone buzzed. A message from Sarah. Is it done? It's done, I replied. The restaurant is mine. They're gone. Over the next few weeks, Signature underwent a transformation. I kept the basic concept but refined it, adding my own touch to the menu and decor. The staff, relieved to be free of David and Jessica's drama, embraced the changes. David tried legal action, of course. But Marcus had made sure everything was airtight. The inheritance clause was clear, the evidence of misuse overwhelming. Jessica disappeared from the scene quickly, moving to New York when she realized David couldn't provide the lifestyle he promised. Last I heard, she was working as a line cook in a chain restaurant. 6 months later, Signature was thriving under my leadership. The irony wasn't lost on me. David and Jessica had inadvertently helped me fulfill my grandmother's wish. I was finally running my own successful business. One evening, as I was reviewing the books in my office, formerly David's office, Sarah stopped by. "You know what's funny?" she said, settling into a chair. "If they hadn't tried to deceive you, if David had been honest about wanting to open a restaurant, you probably would have helped him anyway." Probably, I agreed. But they chose deception. They thought I was too naive to notice, too weak to fight back. "Their mistake," Sarah said, raising her glass in a toast, "to underestimating you." I thought about my grandmother, how she built her business empire through smart decisions and careful planning. How she protected her legacy with that clever clause in her will. She would have appreciated how things turned out. A year after the takeover, I received a letter from David. He was working as a sous chef in Chicago, humbled by his fall from grace. "I understand now," he wrote, "why I threw away, not just our marriage, but your trust. You deserved better." I filed the letter away without responding. He was right, I had deserved better, and I made sure I got it. Signature became known not just for its food, but for its story. People loved hearing about how the betrayed wife turned the tables on her cheating husband and his mistress. Some called it revenge, but I saw it differently. It was justice, served at exactly the right temperature. Every now and then, I catch glimpses of my grandmother in the mirrors that line the restaurant's walls. Not her reflection, but her spirit. In the way I run the business, in the decisions I make, in the strength I found when I needed it most. David and Jessica had tried to build their dream on my inheritance, never realizing they were actually building mine. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just about winning. It's about turning someone else's betrayal into your own triumph.